when my uncle looked me in the eye that morning and said, "This elevator's for VIPs. Sweetheart, you'll need a real badge to ride this one." Everyone laughed, except me. My name is Claire Morgan, and for most of my life, I've stayed quiet while my family treated me like a background character in their own success story. I learned to swallow humiliation the way other people sip their morning coffee, every day, until I couldn't anymore. He didn't know I had the badge. He didn't know that the silence he mocked had turned into steel. He didn't know that the woman he called sweetheart was the one the Pentagon called Iron Wind. The scanner blinked blue. Access granted. Command auth. Iron Wind. The laughter stopped. My uncle's smile faltered, and for the first time in my life, I didn't step back. I stepped in. That was the day the truth rose with me, one floor at a time. Dinner at my mother's house was never about food. It was a stage. My Uncle Dennis filled the room the way oil fills water. Thick, loud, impossible to ignore. He sat at the head of the table, one hand wrapped around a glass of bourbon, the other waving through stories of contracts, board meetings, and the next big deal his company had with NASA. Everyone laughed when he did, even if no one understood a word. I stayed quiet, like always. That was the rule in our family. Dennis spoke. The rest of us nodded. My mother looked at him the way some people look at church altars, with faith, habit, and just enough fear to keep believing. When she said he helped shape my career, I didn't correct her. The truth would have only made her uncomfortable. By dessert, Dennis was in full performance mode. He leaned back in his chair, grin wide and confident. "Claire once wanted to fly," he boasted to the table. Then she realized not everyone's built to lead. The laughter that followed was soft, polite, rehearsed. I forced a smile, feeling that familiar tightening in my chest, the one that comes when you know speaking up will cost more than silence. So I laughed too, because that's what keeps the peace in families like ours. Pretend you're fine, and maybe someday you will be. A week later, Dennis sent out invitations to a defense conference his company was hosting at NASA's Houston campus. "The whole family's coming," he announced proudly. My mother turned to me, her eyes bright. "Go, honey. Show your uncle you still care." I nodded, hiding the letter I'd already received that morning, one from the Air Force Reserve Command, summoning me to the same event for a very different reason. He didn't need to give me a place there. I already had one. I just never needed to prove it, until now. The night before the conference, Dennis took us all to an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind with polished floors, soft jazz, and prices that screamed for attention. He didn't order from the menu, he performed it. In his charcoal suit and gold watch, he laughed louder than the music, talked faster than the waiter could refill his glass, and told stories where he was always the hero. He boasted about million-dollar defense contracts and how NASA had trusted Morgan systems with critical technology. My mother hung on every word like scripture. When the waiter stepped away, he turned toward me, his grin smug and easy. "If you'd learn to sell yourself, I could introduce you to people who matter. Out here, experience counts. Not those uniform games you like to play." I kept my voice even. "I'm fine where I am." He chuckled, swirling his drink. "Fine, that's what people say when they've given up on being great." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Rachel, his 17-year-old daughter, looked up from her phone. "Dad, you make everything sound like a classified project. Last week you said the company had a military advisor. Who's that?" He froze, then forced a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Kids. Huh. Always overhearing things. Eat your food." But she wasn't joking. I could see it. When we left the restaurant, I couldn't stop thinking about her words. At home. I opened my laptop and searched the company's contract listings. Scrolling down, I saw it, my name, printed under Civilian Advisor, Claire Morgan, AFR. I hadn't signed it. I hadn't even been asked. My heart thudded against my ribs. He'd used my credentials to secure a government deal. My own uncle had turned my name into a prop for his performance. For years, I'd stayed quiet to keep the peace. Tonight, silence felt like surrender. Tomorrow, that would end. Morning sunlight hit the NASA administration building like a mirror, blinding and spotless. The glass walls reflected a crowd of executives, contractors, and families waiting to enter. I walked beside my mother and Rachel, keeping my expression calm. Dennis led the group, badge swinging from his neck like a medal. He spoke loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, narrating each hallway as if he'd built it. This area is restricted. The left elevators for guests, the right ones for VIP access only. Take notes, people. Laughter rippled through the group. My mother smiled, proud as ever. I stood behind him, patient, until we reached the checkpoint. The security guard scanned Dennis's badge and nodded him through. Then I stepped forward. Dennis turned, grinned tight. This elevator's for VIPs, sweetheart. You'll need a real badge to ride this one. It wasn't the words that hurt. It was how easily they came to him. How natural it was for him to remind me of my place. I'd heard that tone my whole life. I said nothing. Instead, I reached into my wallet, took out the black ID card, and tapped it against the scanner. A sharp chime. The light turned blue. Access granted. Command auth. Call sign. Iron Wind. The officer at the post straightened instantly. Voice steady. Captain Morgan, ma'am. Welcome. The sound echoed through the hallway. Conversation stopped. My mother's hand froze midair. Rachel's lips parted in disbelief. Dennis's face drained of color. The man who bragged about proximity to power was suddenly standing in front of it, and it wasn't his. I stepped into the elevator, turned back just long enough to meet his eyes, and said quietly, "It's fine. Uncle, I'll see you upstairs." The doors slid shut, sealing the silence behind me. As the elevator began to rise, I realized I wasn't just moving to another floor. I was finally leaving the one I'd been trapped on my entire life. I can't recall what I felt when the elevator opened. Relief, maybe, or just emptiness. Upstairs, I gave a short technical briefing, answered a few questions, nodded through polite greetings. Everyone addressed me by rank, but I felt none of the pride that came with it. Every word, every handshake, felt like walking across thin ice. When I returned to the lobby, Dennis was waiting, arms crossed, fury behind his fixed smile. He walked straight to me, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "You humiliated me in front of NASA. I spent years building that reputation, and you shattered it. What were you trying to prove?" "Nothing," I said. "I used my badge." He laughed, one harsh, brittle sound. "They all saw you enjoying it. You wanted to embarrass me." I looked him dead in the eye. If someone feels humiliated by the truth, that's their problem. His face hardened. Neither of us moved. The noise of the lobby faded until only our breathing remained. Something between us had broken for good. That night my mother called. Her voice was rough, weary. "Dennis didn't mean it. He's just proud," she said. "He wants what's best for you. Some people think wanting what's best gives them the right to control you," I told her. She didn't answer. I heard only her sigh before the line went dead. 3 days later, an urgent email arrived from Air Force Human Resources asking if I had signed a civilian consulting agreement with Morgan Systems. I opened the attachment. My name, my signature, identical. My stomach turned. He had forged it. I called Dennis. No answer. For the first time in my life. I wasn't just dismissed. I was betrayed. The next morning, Dennis showed up at my apartment with my mother beside him. He paced the living room, voice smooth and businesslike. That document was a clerical error. He said, "Don't make this bigger than it needs to be. Families protect each other." "You forged my name," I said. He shrugged. "Signed, unsigned, no one will know. You're military, your name adds credibility. Credibility isn't built on lies." My mother's voice trembled. "Claire, please, if this goes public, your uncle loses everything. I signed the visitor form that day. If they investigate, they'll question me too." I froze. He'd used her without her knowing. "I won't stay quiet," I said. He smirked. "You'd betray your own family?" "No. I'll protect what's right." That night, I filed an official report. Colonel Reeves read it and said quietly, "Truth will isolate you before it frees you. Be ready for that." Days later, the federal investigation began. Morgan Systems was suspended, and Dennis fought back the only way he knew, through manipulation. He filed a counterclaim saying I'd volunteered as his advisor, accusing me of lying. At the hearing, he played the victim. "She's my niece." He told the panel she wouldn't destroy her family over pride. I handed over emails, security logs, and payroll data. The investigator reviewed them, then nodded. "The signature is forged." Dennis's lips trembled, but his voice stayed sharp. "She's always needed to prove she's better than me." Well, now she has. I walked out into the sunlight, numb. My mother waited in the car, tears streaking her face. "Did you have to take it this far?" she whispered. "If I hadn't, he'd do it again. Maybe to you." She didn't speak, just held my hand. That night, the news labeled it a family dispute. Messages flooded in. "Family first. You're ungrateful." I didn't respond. I watched helicopters lift off into the night sky. Machines that didn't care who was watching, rising simply because that was what they were built to do. News spread like wildfire. Morgan Systems was officially suspended from all defense contracts, accused of falsifying military consulting records. The local papers ran Dennis's photo, his proud grin replaced by something brittle and broken. My own name appeared below his in smaller print, labeled "The Traitor Niece." At the base, no one said a word. Silence is the language of soldiers when someone speaks the truth too loudly. You don't praise it, you don't condemn it, you just step aside and let it burn. I kept my head down, maintaining aircraft, leading drills, writing reports. Yet every routine felt heavier, as if I were flying through fog without a horizon in sight. One night, a soft knock sounded on my barracks door. Rachel stood there in a gray hoodie, her eyes swollen and red. She looked smaller than I remembered. "Dad won't eat. Mom's working extra shifts to cover the legal fees. I don't know what to do." I felt something twist inside me. Part anger, part pity. "Do you regret what you did?" she asked. I looked straight at her. "No. But I wish I wasn't the only one who saw it was wrong." Her voice cracked. "I saw him sign it. I heard him say, 'No one needs to know.'" I didn't stop him. I was scared. The words hit me like a punch. I had been that child once, watching something wrong, too afraid to speak. I pulled her into an embrace. "You can't save your father with a lie," I whispered, "but you can save yourself with the truth." Days later, Houston was swallowed by the worst hurricane in 20 years. The base went into full alert. I was assigned to fly a helicopter carrying medical supplies to a flooded district. Outside, wind screamed across the tarmac. Inside, guilt and duty battled for control. When the navigation system failed mid-flight, my co-pilot yelled, "Captain, navigation's offline! We don't turn back," I said. "People are waiting." The warning lights flashed crimson, bright, rhythmic, like the blue light that once glowed on the elevator panel. I realized both moments were tests, one for honor, one for courage. 4 hours later, we landed safely. The entire crew survived. The next morning, news headlines called us the heroic rescue team. For the first time in months, I smiled. I didn't need anyone's approval anymore. I only needed to know I hadn't turned back. 2 weeks after the storm, Houston began to heal. One morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Dennis. "I don't know who I am anymore." I stared at the screen. Sunlight spilling across the window, blinding and sharp, the way truth always is when you finally face it. I drove to his apartment. The door was unlocked. Boxes and files were scattered across the floor. Dennis sat alone, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. "You happy now?" he rasped. "You won!" "No one won," I said. "Only the truth did." He laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "Truth doesn't pay the bills. I lost my house, my friends, my name. And you, What did you gain? I sat across from him. Peace. I can finally sleep at night. A long silence filled the room. Wind swept in through the open window, lifting a newspaper off the table. The headline read, "Morgan Systems officially terminated from federal contracts." He stared at it, then whispered, voice trembling, "I used your name because I was afraid. You're everything I wanted to be, only real. I just wanted to feel above someone again." "You only lose when you need others to believe you're above them," I said. His eyes glistened, and for the first time, I saw the man beneath the arrogance, fragile, exhausted, human. As I stood to leave, he muttered, "The family will never forgive you." I turned at the door. "You don't need forgiveness to live right. You just need to stop apologizing for being honest." In the hallway, Rachel was waiting. She'd heard everything. Her face was calm, her voice steady. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not staying silent." I froze. Maybe for the first time. Thank you didn't sound like pity. It sounded like understanding. A year later, I returned to Ellington Field, not to fly, but to stand before the ranks I'd once served beside. The ceremony was held in the aircraft hangar, sunlight pouring through open doors, glinting off the rotors of the helicopters behind me. The air smelled of oil and metal, of everything I had fought to protect. Colonel Reeves's voice echoed through the speakers, steady and proud. Major Claire Morgan, for exceptional integrity and duty under crisis. He pinned the medal to my uniform, the metal cool against my chest. Flashbulbs burst like quiet thunder. When I looked down into the crowd, I saw my mother sitting beside Rachel, and between them, unbelievably, was Dennis. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it, but when the ceremony ended, he rose and walked toward me. His hands were empty, his shoulders rounded, the swagger long gone. "When the elevator opened that day, I lost everything," he said softly. "But I also realized I never had anything real to begin with." He lifted his chin, eyes wet but steady. "I used to think respect meant being looked up to. Turns out, it's about learning to look others in the eye." Then he straightened his back and raised his hand in a perfect military salute. No one asked him to. No one expected it. Still, that single gesture, simple, stripped of pride, hit harder than any apology. I returned the salute, not out of duty, but out of respect. Not for the man he had been, but for the man finally willing to change. Rachel ran up then, wrapping her arms around me. Her voice trembled against my shoulder. "I applied to the Air Force," she whispered. "I want to learn to fly, and to be honest." I smiled through the blur in my eyes. Amid the applause and camera flashes, I realized victory wasn't about defeating anyone. It was about giving someone else the courage to start again. 2 years later, Houston had settled into peace again. The storm was just a memory now, and Morgan Systems existed only as a footnote in an old government report. The world had moved on. So had we. I drove through Pasadena's industrial district, past warehouses that smelled of rust and rain, until I saw it. A small building with a new sign. Morgan Technical Learning Center. Mentorship for youth engineers. Inside, the air buzzed faintly with the hum of old machinery. At a workbench, Dennis stood surrounded by a few college students, showing them how to disassemble an engine that had seen better days. His hair had gone grayer, his shoulders thinner, but his voice was patient, calm. When he noticed me, he smiled, quiet and genuine. "Now I teach them how not to cheat their way into a job," he said. "Turns out, I might still be good for something." "Not still." I told him, "You just started being real." He handed me a white ID card, plain and unpolished. It read, "Dennis Morgan, instructor." "I used to live off fake elevators," he said with a soft laugh. "Now I take the stairs, slow, honest, one step at a time." The door opened, and Rachel walked in. Uniform crisp, nameplate gleaming, R. Morgan. Her voice carried the pride of a new beginning. "I graduate next month," she said. "Uncle's coming to watch me fly." Dennis nodded, eyes glistening. First time in my life. I'm proud without needing anyone beneath me. The room went still, except for the low rumble of an engine starting up, a heartbeat of something beginning again. No one had forced any of us to start over. We simply chose to, with the only thing that had ever been real, the truth. 10 years later, I stood once again inside Ellington Field. This time not as a pilot, but as its commanding officer. The years had etched themselves quietly into the hangar walls, yet the scent of fuel and wind felt unchanged. That morning, I walked beside Lieutenant Rachel Morgan, the youngest pilot of her graduating class. Her steps were steady, her gaze clear, the same determined spark I once carried when the world dared to underestimate me. We stopped before a polished metal elevator marked Authorized Personnel Only. Rachel looked up at me, her smile curious. "What does VIP really mean?" she asked. I glanced down at the black badge on my uniform, the silver letters of iron wind catching the morning light. It means having the courage to walk in, even when someone says you don't belong. She nodded, swiped her badge, and the scanner glowed blue, the same color that once changed everything for me. A soft ding echoed through the hall. We stepped in together, side by side, not out of rank or privilege, but because it was time for the next generation to understand that real worth never asks for permission. As the doors closed, the Houston sky stretched beyond the windows, wide, bright, and free.